Hi, this is Jason Cascarino. Thanks for listening to the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, a production of the Remaking Middle School Initiative, whose founding partners include Youth-Nex, the University of Virginia's Center to Promote Effective Youth Development, and the Association for Middle-Level Education, or AMLE. You can learn about Remaking Middle School on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. Now, here's this episode. Hello and welcome to the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, where we explore the many facets of young adolescents in the middle school years, from the adverse to the awkward to the awesome. I'm your host, Jason Cascarino. Today, I talk with Rachel Graham, Director of Programs at the Lefkofsky Family Foundation in Chicago, founded by Liz and Eric Lefkofsky. The foundation has made middle grades a singular focus for its education funding, important in a city where young adolescents have the opportunity to apply to enroll in one of the many selective and specialty high schools outside their neighborhood. The foundation's Success-Bound program helps K-8 elementary schools use developmental science to better prepare their middle grade students to be thoughtful and planful of their futures as they make consequential decisions in their choice of high school.
I remember specifically going to a high school fair one year and asking students why they selected a specific high school, and their responses, which were on average made for very superficial reasons. I mean, one student told me that they chose a high school because they saw cool robots on the table. And so when I pressured him a little more, I was like, well, how close is that school to your house? He was like, oh, that's a great question. I should go ask. And so it just made clear to us, to Liz and I really, that something was missing. If we're asking students to make life-determining decisions in 8th grade, then we need to have conversations with them about who they are, what they're passionate about, and what they want for their future starting much earlier than 8th grade.
Rachel and I talk about why the foundation chose to focus on middle grades, how the Success-Bound program came to be, how the foundation works with educators in communities of practice to integrate the programming school-wide, what the foundation is learning about changes in practice, behaviors, and student outcomes tied to young adolescent development and the transition into high school, and how middle school can become more central to the national education agenda, and why philanthropy should see young adolescents in middle schools as an opportunity for investment. Also, one quick note for transparency, the Lefkofsky Family Foundation is a funder of Remaking Middle School. Now, here's my conversation with Rachel Graham. Rachel, it's so nice to get to talk with you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So I want to talk about your work at Lefkofsky Family Foundation in a minute, but let's talk about you first. Before you entered the world of philanthropy, you started out your career as a school psychologist. Let's start by telling me why you were drawn to that. What was your experience like, and how does it influence you in your work today?
Yeah. So, I think it's even beneficial to start earlier in that. I grew up in a household that was very involved in education. My grandmother was a teacher. My mother was a special education teacher. My dad was a psychologist. I think all growing up, I knew I wanted to do something that combined those roles together. And so as you mentioned, prior to my role at the Lefkofsky Family Foundation, I was a school psychologist in elementary school. And I spent a lot of my time working with adults to create environments that supported students with diverse learning needs. We spend a lot of time looking at data across the school to help improve practice for students, for diverse learner students, but also for general education students, and really looking at how teacher practice impacted and influenced student achievement. And I think I've always really believed that young people are the vehicle for deep change in our country. And I think with that passion, it really led me right over to the Lefkofsky Family Foundation. I knew Liz Lefkofsky, the co-founder of the foundation, tangentially. And, she came to me with an opportunity to come work for her to help her actualize her vision for supporting Chicago public schools. And I'd been at the school for a long time and really felt that the impact I could make was limited. So I took a year off my position at the school and gave it a go to see what this would be like. Yeah, and it quickly became clear to me that there was great potential for change at the macro level, working directly with the foundation versus at an individual school directly with individual students. So I officially joined the foundation as a director of program in 2012 and really haven't looked back or regretted my decision for a minute.
So now, as you said, you are director of programs at Lefkofsky Family Foundation, which is based here in Chicago. And we're going to do a deep dive into the foundation's education work, specifically around middle grades. But just as a bit of a primer, let's briefly touch upon the foundation as a whole for folks who aren't familiar with it. So Lefkofsky and Lefkofsky Family Foundation comes from Liz and Eric Lefkofsky, as you mentioned. Just tell me a little bit more about them and their philanthropic interests, which, as I understand it, extends beyond education, right?
Yeah, it definitely does. They established the foundation in 2006, and the foundation seeks to advance high impact programming and initiatives and research that enhance the quality of human life in four main areas. So education, human rights, medical research, and the arts. Eric Lefkofsky really does focus a lot of his energy on some of the civic and arts and the medical research side. And Liz has always had a passion for education and human rights. And she spent her whole professional career in the nonprofit space. So really passionate about women's reproductive justice, gun violence prevention, and really ensuring that all students have access to a high quality education with, as you mentioned, a deep focus in the middle grades.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. I want to know why middle school, and you know this, we've had conversations before. My experience working in this space is that the number of philanthropies having a specific focus on middle grades is rather small.
Yeah.
There may be foundations investing in middle grades work, but most often it's through some other interests, right? They might fund STEM, or they might fund mentoring, or they might fund after school, or they might fund social emotional learning, and middle grades sort of crops up in those investments. But a specific focus on middle grades as an area of concern or interest, or certainly as a lever of change, is more uncommon in philanthropy, at least today. There was some time in the 1990s and early 2000s where there was some big national philanthropic pushes on middle grades, but that has waned substantially. So tell me how Lefkofsky came to making middle school your big play in your education portfolio.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been in education for a while, and in doing this work, we saw that the conversations in Chicago and nationally, like you mentioned, really clustered in early childhood or post-secondary. And if it was in middle grades, it's out of school time space, or it's STEM. It's not really looking at that developmental time frame or that transition to high school, which is so crucial. And so we really saw that little time or resources, really any sort of support, was kind of happening in that middle grades. And we saw this age as a real opportunity for disruption and to really catalyze others around the opportunity and importance the middle grades have on a student's developmental trajectory. That was obviously, once we got started in the work, more and more research has continued to come out about the importance of middle grades, that students, their brains and their bodies, and they're developing, more than any other time outside of birth to 3. And we know what the birth to 3 movement has been, and the giant push for intervention and support in that space, that it was kind of like crazy to us that nobody's focusing on this second key time that can really ameliorate any childhood trauma. It can set kids up on a path for success that helps them see who they want to be for their future, both civically, educationally, in the workforce, and socially. So it seems just this huge opportunity to really dive in and help kids be who they want to be.
Right. There does seem to be, we study this a lot at Remaking Middle School, the funding on middle grades is so much lighter and less strategic in middle grades than it is in early childhood, as you mentioned, and certainly in college and career readiness. So at opposite ends. And philanthropy seems to follow a similar pattern. I'd be curious to learn a little bit about some of your perhaps conversations with your peers in the philanthropic space. Do you have a sense that there is a growing, hopefully, recognition that middle grades or early adolescence is important? Is there any kind of shift that you're seeing, or is there any persuasion that you've been able to be successful at?
Definitely. I absolutely see the conversation starting to shift. I mean, the research coming out of the Science of Learning and Development, the Nation of Hope report from Aspen, I think there's lots of things that are pointing to that. I don't necessarily think there's enough players or actors in the space to really to put a guiding poles around that. And so I think that's some of the work that we're hoping to do together with Remaking Middle School, is to really kind of put a North Star together to help people see the direction and how to make that change. I do hear a lot of conversation happening around that space. And it ends up, I think like we talked about, it ends up going towards like social emotional learning or trauma, or oftentimes into these deficit frames where we know that if we catalyze around student strengths, we're going to see bigger impact. And if we're supporting the environment that students are learning in, we're going to see middle grade students flourish, not as a time to like get away from, but a time to really dive in and let them grow. So I think the narrative shift is one that we have to make, right? One that moves from, the deficits that happen in middle grades to really truly the opportunity to push kids to their highest potential.
You said dive in, so let's dive into Success Bound, which is a program that you all have created and funded and begun to scale, that's designed for middle grades students, 6th through 8th grade. Let's provide some context before we talk about the details of the program. Tell me about the development of Success Bound. Who all was involved in creating it? What problem were you trying to solve, and what opportunity were you trying to take advantage of?
In Chicago, I think it really started, there's a complex application system where you have students in 7th grade. Students 7th grade grades and attendance determine their high school eligibility, much like your junior year in high school determines your college eligibility. And as we were working with CPS and heard from teachers and counselors and students and families, there was a real inequity in the level of support and resources students received when making that choice. So prep and determining how to make that choice, and then actually following through and attending the school. That whole transition, there was a real discrepancy in terms of support and resources aimed at helping students through that transition.
We should probably just clarify for folks listening in from other parts of the country. So Chicago does have a pretty open enrollment system for the high school level. And there's, as you said, a complex application system. And so that's the broad context within the school environment that you're operating in.
Exactly. So at the beginning of your 8th grade year in Chicago, you get an eligibility form that's based on your performance in 7th grade. And it outlines for you what schools you're eligible to apply for. But even through that, you might need to take an additional test or attend an info session or all these other steps in order to get through there. So it might say on paper that you're eligible for a specific school, but you might not have the exact number of points to get into that school, or there might be a number of additional barriers you have to get through in order to make it to that school. You have families with resources that have really a solid understanding and know-how of how to game the system in terms of making sure that you reach all those steps. Whereas you have students that maybe don't have as much information or as much background around the process that really aren't able to navigate it in any sort of way that makes sense or helps them realize what they want to be for their future. I remember specifically going to a high school fair one year and asking students why they selected a specific high school, and their responses, which were on average made for very superficial reasons. I mean, one student told me that they chose a high school because they saw cool robots on the table. And so when I pressured him a little more, I was like, well, how close is that school to your house? He was like, oh, that's a great question. I should go ask, And so it just made clear to us, to Liz and I really, that something was missing. If we're asking students to make life determining decisions in 8th grade, then we need to have conversations with them about who they are, what they're passionate about, and what they want for their future, starting much earlier than 8th grade. The school communities share this as a huge area for impact. So we worked with the University of Chicago and Chicago Public Schools to create Success Bound to help middle school students, kind of, as we said, explore their passion, understand their grades and attendance, to be able to help them see how they can be eligible and really chart their own educational path. I think as we talked about, the work has even been more reinforced by the Science of Learning and Development, really showing that this crucial age time of rapid brain and body development. It's a time when they're moving from the self to the social being, and students decide who they want to be in the social, economic, and civil worlds. And they see the injustice in the world and they feel like they want the ability to make it right. And so while the transition to high school was the catalyst for us building this Success Bound program, we have seen, how it has really helped students engage in school in a very different way when they can understand why they come to school every day by connecting it to careers that they're exploring and identifying that align with who they want to be and the change they want to make in the world. Yeah. So I think really through the creation of Success Bound, we were hoping to shift the conversation in classrooms and schools across the city so students can begin to chart their own educational path, knowing that the adults in the environment that they're in are there to support them and really believe in them along their path.
And that has been a really critical area of focus for folks in Chicago, specifically that transition into high school. Our friends at the University of Chicago have done a lot of work on what they call on track, which is the specific measures to show that kids are on track to graduating on time and successfully, using attendance and grades as some of the key measures. But those are really kind of the measures that showcase for us that young people are either on track or they're not on track. What I think Success Bound is on about is really what are the inputs to those measures? Can we do a better job in setting up environments better, in engaging with young people better so that they still show up and they are engaged in their learning? Talk to me a little bit about some of the core elements of the programming. Just paint a picture of what happens in a school with Success Bound.
Sure. Really, it's helpful to think about Success Bound as a school-wide counseling program that aims at redesigning middle school by emphasizing conversations about student identity and post-secondary exploration. The program really emphasizes changes in school-wide conditions for learning and adult support for the transition by placing greater value on counseling during middle school years, strong adult-student relationship, and a collaborative approach to instruction between counselors and teachers. So Success Bound emphasizes the role of the whole school community in supporting students and families with the transition to high school and beyond. So it really Success Bound has 5 key themes in the instructional part of the work. So there's self-exploration, where students develop an understanding of their strengths and values and how that can contribute to success in the classroom, as well as connect to their future goals. The second one is social capital. So, helping students identify key people and resources necessary for them to reach their high school and post-secondary goals. We know how important that is in our professional life, right? We have networks that help us navigate career changes or, any changes or movement in your life. And so it's important to kind of help students see who's around them to build their own, what we call success team. The second theme is student success skills. So here students learn how to set goals, to monitor their grades and attendance, and stay on track for high school graduation. I think it's really important to help students understand that grades are not something that's just done to them, but that they can be an active participant in understanding their grades, asking teachers tough questions about why they got a certain grade, and helping really push on, push from the ground up really on a school level, equitable grading practices, or why is an A in this class, but a D in this class, and kind of really pushing on those pieces. The fourth theme is high school awareness and selection. And so that is helping students navigate their high school options and learn how to apply and prepare for enrollment in high school. So just for anyone out there who's not in Chicago and doesn't have this crazy enrollment system, we do have a national version of the curriculum that focuses much more on what that transition's like and how to prepare for it, from understanding AP courses to different clubs and activities that take place. And then I think the fifth theme, which is really important, is that post-secondary and life vision, helping students in the middle grade explore careers and post-secondary options and discuss how that can connect to their interests, goals, and priorities. So those are the overarching 5 themes. But then we have a team, a Success Bound team. We partner closely with schools to help them implement this effectively. So we do this by offering monthly coaching sessions, sometimes in group settings, sometimes more individually, to help schools implement this as a team and really integrate it into their school culture. And then we also bring the schools together 4 times per year to share best practices and key learnings. We call those our community practice meetings, where we anchor our work always in adolescent development. Then we talk about implementation practices and dive into kind of the school level on track. And I think it's just important to note too that we're really in constant conversation with school counselors, teachers, school administrators, students, and families on how to improve this work. We really see this as something that's ever evolving, and we're listening to the voices on the ground in an effort to make sure that the resources we create and share are things that are needed. Our team is continuously innovating on the work to ensure that all middle grade students have the opportunity to build an educational path that aligns with their individual passions.
So there's a lot in there that is hyper tied into adolescent development, right? So you can hear the notes around agency, young people sort of taking ownership over their own learning, over their own path, their selection into high school, and their understanding of careers, their identity. So really kind of tapping into understanding sort of who they are. And I love this stuff around what I would sort of say is self-efficacy, like advocating for themselves and having their opinions and having their ideas valued. The example that you gave of young people being able to push back on grades and trying to sort of understand that. It sounds like you have been very intentional about tying together the programmatic elements with your understanding of the developmental science.
Absolutely. We start all of our meetings grounding in the adolescent development space, because I think that we have seen through our work with Success Bound, we have seen that the environment we teach middle grade students does not always align with their developmental needs. So while the themes of Success Bound really tap into what we need to be working with students on, we know there's a lot of work that needs to happen on the adult side and the environment side as well.
And you talked about these communities of practice. I think for folks listening in who are part of communities of practice, give us a bit of a flavor of what those sessions are like. It's more than just counselors, right? You mentioned including teachers and administrators. So there's a group of educators from schools that are working together. Talk me through what a session looks like. How does your staff work with them over the course of a session? And what are the things that you take them through?
Yeah. So currently in Chicago, we're working with 150 Chicago public schools. And so we have divided those 150 schools into 12 cohorts. And in those 12 cohorts, we come together 4 times a year through these sessions. And we really invite anyone within the school that is engaged in Success Bound work, but really insist upon someone from school admin as well as the school counselor to come together. And we always start the session grounded in adolescent development. So some sort of research where we're diving into the research, looking at that, and then coming up with ideas for how to apply that research into their school setting. So we did a big conversation on healthy risk and how do we help, make sure that there are opportunity for risk within the classroom. We've talked a lot about youth voice. How do we, if you're experiencing an attendance issue in your school, how do you take some of those 8th grade students, bring them together and have them solve the problem, right? How do you help kids be active members in their environment? And then what we typically go into in this, and again, this is every session's a little bit different based on the needs of those in the cohort, but we do then try to have some collaborative discussion around implementation. So schools can learn from each other on best practices, on things that they've tried that have worked versus also things that they've tried that they had a little bit of pushback on. And then what we do is we bring the schools together around their school level data and walk them through a data analysis protocol where they're looking at high level trends in their data. So we're asking them not to look at individual students and say, hey, well, it's because this kid doesn't come to school every day or things of that nature, but much more so, is there a high level trend? Like, are your Black boys having lower grades in math than your girls? Do you have a large clump of students that are coming to school 95% of the time, but are all off track in reading? Some of these things that would trigger ideas around what's happening in the environment in order to cause that discrepancy. So that's how those sessions typically go. And then we follow up with individual sessions in the school if needed to help kind of build school buy-in, work together around any of the different goals and areas of development that the school wants around the Success Bound in their themes.
And in the school, is the counselor seen as the lead And that counselor then provides the support to the full staff. I'm trying to get a sense of like, where does the curriculum, where does the programming, where does it start, and how does it, because you talk about school-wide, how does it become a school-wide thing?
Yeah, we usually see it over like a 3-year arc where maybe that first year it is the counselor, or maybe it's a teacher or a principal that has found us and wants to work with us. And so it might be one individual's responsibility to do that work, but we're working with the school to help everyone in the building really understand what's happening in Success Bound class, which tends to end up being, it's 45 minutes per week, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We see it a lot in advisory spaces. We sometimes see it in social studies, an SEL block. We've seen it implemented in a number of different ways, but really we use that school counselor as the anchor and the person that is really kind of coordinating it in the school. So as we move into year 2, we like to see that this be taught by a team of teachers. So at grade level meetings, they're reviewing kind of where they all are with the curriculum and what's working, what do they need to modify, how are their students experiencing it. And then by year 3, we really see it kind of be more of a holistic approach through the culture of the building, where they're maybe doing career fairs or parent workshops on post-secondary exploration or adolescent development, and kind of really bringing that into the whole culture of the school and elevating where students are developmentally, and really, changing the conversation from promotion, like I'm going to help get my students to the next grade, to I'm going to really help be a leader or a partner for my students to help them see what they want to do for their future.
You've been at this how many years? How many years is Success Bound? Like, what's the school that's had the Success Bound the longest?
So we started it in partnership with University of Chicago and Chicago Public Schools in 2014 in very few schools. And then actually in 2018, so I think we took it over. So this is our 3rd year of the Lefkofsky Family Foundation running Success Bound.
And I'd be curious over that course of time, what you're learning. I assume that like most programs or initiatives, impact probably varies across site, right? Due to differences in implementation or capacity or timing or a host of things. But on balance, what has been the impact of Success Bound, would you say?
Well, if you think about the learning from the work, I think we're always looking to innovate. And I think through the work, we clearly saw, and through the research, right, out of TNTP and Gallup, that shows that student engagement kind of decreases in 5th grade and continues to decrease through 9th grade and then levels off. We've seen 8th graders being treated the same as kindergartners with little freedom or independence, like that, right? That the science shows that they really need to take risk. And so because of all that, I think that's why we partnered with you guys at the Remaking Middle School team to establish and to try to determine a kind of the Remaking Middle School lab in Chicago, because our hope is really to have a guiding framework to help all environments where students learn, support them where they're developmentally so they can engage more deeply in school and connect what they're doing today to who they want to be. I think that it's also important to, we're in this strange COVID time. So that has really impacted our work as well. Our team and our Success Bound coaches, they sprang into action in the spring, and they did 2 key things. We do office hours now. So twice a week, we have a place where all of our school counselors can join together in a supportive environment to problem solve and to share tools and resources around how they're implementing Success Bound. And then secondly, we began including virtual options for all of our lessons, so that, so many things in our students' lives were canceled this year. And we wanted to make sure that we knew that their futures weren't canceled. And so we made sure that could continue. So that's kind of the things we've been learning along the way. But in terms of impact, I know you asked a little bit about that. I think we're seeing a couple key things. One is that we're seeing that conversation in the school change from promotion to really kind of thinking about bigger picture, and adults helping students think about that and connecting it to their future. We're also seeing schools look at their data in a little bit of a different way. When you have your students looking at their grades and attendance, it does push the conversation at the adult level about how grading and grades happen. And then we're seeing students make that connection from future to what they're doing at school, in school every day. So we are seeing them a little bit more engaged in their schoolwork, as well as taking more ownership over their grades and attendance. One story of a teacher, they were in a grade level meeting and, just said that all of a sudden she got like 10 emails from her sixth grade students asking her to please input the grades from the last test. She was like, I didn't know anyone cared or paid attention. So we are seeing that self-efficacy, self-advocacy of students really taking ownership over their learning.
I've known you to be someone who likes to take big swings. You've worked in middle grades and you've built a successful program that is operating at some scale. You mentioned 150 schools and a large school system. What are your reflections about middle school as a whole? There is ample evidence that the education system is not serving young adolescents well enough, right? There are great middle school teachers out there and administrators and after school programs and programs like yours doing terrific work in the middle grades. But if you look at the entirety of the education field, middle school is where many young people go off track in their education, as we've discussed. They disengage and they enter high school underprepared. What has your work with Success Bound taught you about what action we need to take as a field? I mean, not just educators, but researchers and advocates and funders to better serve young adolescents.
Yeah, I think I would boil it down to a few. I think first and foremost, we still see so many people thinking about middle school as a time to get kids through safely rather than an opportunity to inspire the next generation of leaders. So at LFF, we really believe strongly there needs to be a national movement to identify what opportunities are ripe for development in this age bracket and what the learning environments need to look like for the development of those mindsets and skills in young people. And then I think it's important to look at the policies that are in place or that need to be in place to cultivate learning for middle school students aligned to their developmental needs. So I would love to see in the future a commission on early adolescent development to help guide this work and really put change into practice. I think second, when we talk about early adolescence, it's crucial to also talk about race, how we develop our identities and understand the identities of those different from us. Middle school students clearly see and understand what's fair and what is not. And it's an opportunity to address and build understanding around structural inequities and build students dedicated to anti-racism. And finally, I think there's a continued need to discuss social emotional learning and really embedding it in the classroom instruction. Social emotional learning is not something that happens at 3 p.m. on Thursdays, but really whole support, really supporting the whole child in supportive environments and developmental relationships, I think is key. I think the last thing I would say is, right, we're doing a lot of embedding SEL in Success Bound into this counseling program. So we would love to see Success Bound expand outside of Chicago.
There's so much in the space right now that I think dovetails so nicely into middle grades that it's really, in my mind, kind of the next big opportunity, right? When you look at things like the science of learning and development and social emotional learning, which you've talked about, but just the rallying around things like project-based learning and student-centered education, student voice, youth participation, all of those things, as you've mentioned, are just tied in so nicely to young adolescent development that, you know, for the funding community, it sounds like in many respects, you don't have to change what you're doing. Just see young adolescents and middle grades as an opportunity to apply the great things that they're already doing.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Finally, Rachel, if there's one bit of advice based on your experience running programs and investing in the middle grades that you would offer to educators, both in school and in after school or summer programs, of things they either ought to know or ought to be doing, what would it be?
I think first, educators and families should read up on the science of learning and development and really meet students where they are, ask them how they're doing, really listen to their answers, ask them what they need to be successful, how are they experiencing school, and help them feel empowered to own their own education. It sounds like a given, but I think what we've talked through is that, you know, we often treat middle school students as passive learners when really they can be active participants in the process and help strengthen their own education. And I think obviously I would also be remiss to say, like, Success Bound is a great resource. It can be adapted in different contexts and works within existing staff structures. So, go to successbound.org. We'd love to work with anyone interested in implementing what we see as a game-changing program. It's all the resources on the website are free and available for anyone. You just request a login and you can have access to the curriculum. And, I think that it's important that we help students see that we believe in them just as much as we want them to believe in themselves.
Well, Rachel, it's been a pleasure. Good luck continuing to grow Success Bound, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. This has been fun.
That was Rachel Graham, Director of Programs at the Lefkofsky Family Foundation. You can follow Rachel and the work of the Foundation's Success Bound program on Twitter at successboundorg or online at successbound.org. Lessons in Adolescence features conversations with researchers, practitioners, program developers, and advocates for young adolescents in the middle school years. Recently, I talked with Jody Grant, the longtime executive director of the After School Alliance, the nation's preeminent advocacy organization for after-school programming. The After School Alliance has produced multiple updates of its America After 3 p.m. report, the most comprehensive examination of the after-school field, including a recent look at some of the specific challenges and opportunities of after-school programs for middle school-aged youth.
I think the biggest difference from elementary school to middle school is that kids can walk with their feet. Most kids in elementary school, a parent puts them there and they're going to stay there. I think for middle school programs, the high-quality programs need to engage the kids a lot more in the entire program design. So what are the things that the kids are going to want to do? What's going to keep them there, keep them coming? More and more you're hearing, a wonderful thing about our youth, which is that they want to be doing things that are relevant, that are making a social difference.
You can catch all of my conversation with Jody in a previous episode. Thanks for joining the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, a production of Remaking Middle School, an initiative that seeks to transform the learning and development experience for young adolescents in the middle school years. Remaking Middle School brings together good educational practice in school and out of school with the latest developmental science. You can learn about Remaking Middle School or find more resources about the topics of this podcast on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. Or learn more about the founding partner organizations, the University of Virginia's Youth-Nex Center, on the web at education.virginia.edu/youth-nex, N-E-X, or on Twitter at youth_nex, and the Association for Middle Level Education, on the web at amle.org or on Twitter at AMLE. The Lessons in Adolescence podcast is produced by Abby Gillespie and me, Jason Cascarino. You can listen to or download each episode at the Remaking Middle School website, on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for listening.